Welcome to Grief Chats with Dana and Mira, where we talk candidly about all things grief and widowhood. Grief is hard. Let's talk about it.
Okay, I feel like we should just jump into this.
A drink.
Ready for awkwardness.
Okay. Welcome to Grief Chats, everybody. Today we have the best topic ever. We're going to be talking about grief, dating, and sexuality, which is probably the most common topic I think both Dana and I get asked about. And I think it's one of the topics in widowhood and in grief that just is so under talked about. And that's why, because people are craving an open conversation. And I think when things are, all of grief is stigmatized, but especially anything to do with sexuality and grief is so stigmatized, and there's just such a need for conversation. So we definitely knew we wanted to talk about this, and now is the time.
Today.
So yeah, we're nervous, but also believe in the importance. So we'll power through. So we're going to have an open conversation this episode just about some general topics within widowhood, sex, and dating. And then next episode, we're going to follow up by answering a bunch of the questions that you guys sent us, because we had so many. We knew that it would just fill an entire episode, and we wanted to do this topic justice because it's obviously such a big one. And we're going to be talking from the perspective of widows, since we're both widows, and it's, there's a lot of specific things to widowhood about losing your life partner, your sexual partner, all in one, but the loss of sexuality or changes in sexuality affects many different grievers. So hopefully this episode resonates with lots of people. Within specifically widowhood, I think the reason why it's such a complex topic is that often we watched our partners die. So we watch their physical bodies actually kind of wither, especially if there was a cancer diagnosis. And that can be really, I think that adds an extra element of trauma to us as sexual beings and physically intimate beings. And, there's also the issue of being in love often with, more often than not, forever in love with somebody who is dead, while also still being here and potentially wanting to be with somebody else, but being so torn about it because we are also forever connected to and in love with someone who is dead, which I think separates widowhood very much from divorce. One of the many ways that widowhood is very different from divorce. And there may be lots of feelings around guilt, around, all of the judgments from other people, around wanting this sort of push and pull between wanting a sexual partner, wanting that again for ourselves, and also resisting it and pushing it away for a number of reasons that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. And I also think I just want to add that we are only sharing from our experiences. I feel like we say this every time, but especially with sex and relationships, it's so different for everyone. And so we are hoping to come from a place where we are not judging. And if our experience is different than your experience, it really is not meant to be judgmental. It's just we're sharing what we know and what we've been through personally. And I think we'll be pretty open, even though I think we are struggling a little bit with how much to share and how open to be. Like most people, this is not an easy conversation to have. But really, I just want to say there's no normal, there's no right way, there's no right timeline. And so just want to be clear with that from the beginning, that this is just our experience and how we're handling it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think in grief, there's so many judgments and expectations around timeline and all of that stuff. And everybody's so different. We say that about everything in grief.
Yes.
But I feel like with sexuality and intimacy specifically, there is even more of a wide variety of how people respond that can just be complete opposites. The spectrum is so large and varied, and I just feel like I've heard everything. Everybody just responds in a different way, and everyone's wondering if they're doing it right,
Right.
And there is no right. It's it's impossible. The whole thing is impossible and so tricky. So yeah, zero judgment at all.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think we do enough of that on ourselves. I feel like I'm constantly judging or worrying about being judged. And so it's we have no judgment for however you handle moving forward, whether it's with a sexual being, whether it's yourself in a relationship, whatever that looks like. So
yeah, and also like if you choose not to be with anybody else, you know, I feel like that's a super valid choice too, and one that a lot of people don't understand that, and that can be like a very valid choice for a number of reasons, not only like fear of opening yourself up again, like that's sort of like the cliche one, but I think there's like lots of people that choose not to get into a partnership again for other reasons in widowhood that are perfectly healthy and normal and
satisfied in their life. Yeah, what a great point to mention, that is not because they're afraid. Some people just make that decision and that's the best for them.
Yeah, totally.
So do you want to start by sharing a little bit of your experience in this realm and what we went through and are going through?
Yeah. So I know it's like so hard to know how much to share. And the last time I sometimes share in my stories about dating stuff. And the last time I shared, somebody wrote me and was like, very bluntly was like, can you please talk more about sex specifically? Like, I want to know the nitty gritty details. Like, she was so direct, and I was like, touche. Okay. You know, it's like,
I love that. I love when people are so direct with like what they want. And I'm like, yes, I will try and be better.
Yeah. Because I kind of talked about like this first date that I went on. And for me, I decided like 4 months after Brian died, I was just like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go on a date. Like I sort of put this thing on myself where I was like, I have to do it. I had this sort of strange strength and courage early on in my grief that I kind of lost more over time. It was almost like I felt like nothing could touch me, and I was invincible. Like it was totally shock and trauma and everything, right? But I just felt like I could do anything, and I was like, I know I want to have sex again one day. I want to go out and have a date and just do this thing and get it over with and like pull off that Band-Aid. Yeah. And so I went on this one date with this guy, and it was fine. Like he was a great guy. It was like a great first date in terms of, you know, lots of things to talk about and everything. It went okay. And I really was very dissociated throughout the day. Like I really had this feeling of like I was playing a part in a play, and like I'd been crying for like 4 months straight and hadn't really seen any friends and barely. And I just like went on this date and pretended I was a different person. Yeah. And it was really nice and it felt really good. And I was like, wow, like I was so impressed by myself. I was like, well, I can't believe I'm doing this thing. Like I'm crazy. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the date, he was like, can I kiss you? And I froze and did not say anything for like an uncomfortable length of time. You know? And then in my head, I was just like, yeah, Mira, go for it. Like, this is your opportunity to do it. And I was like, yes. And then we started kissing and making out, and I literally had like a full on trauma response. Like I was like floating above my body and I was looking down and I was like, who is this person? Why is his face all over my face? I couldn't feel anything. I was like not in my body at all. It was terrifying. And I was not there. I was not physically there. And then we kind of finished making out, and then I was just like, okay, bye. And I literally like ran away. And it was like 2 a.m. and I ran home from the bar, and I was just like sobbing and running in the middle of the night in Toronto. And it was like this huge release. And it wasn't like I felt like I shouldn't have done it. Like I was actually proud of myself that I did it, because I think just with the way my relationship was with Brian and how connected we were and how immediate that connection was, my fear from the beginning has always been like, you're just not going to even try because it's never going to compare. So you're just not going to even try. So I was really proud of myself for trying. And I was also really freaked out by my body's response. Like it really, really concerned me. Like I was just like very caught off guard by it, but also it kind of brought on this new level of processing. And, you know, I was really realizing like, oh yeah, the last person I kissed was Brian and he was dead. And kind of the magnitude of that. And it just felt really strange. Like, it was sort of like my first big foray into sexuality again. And then since then, there's been different ups and downs and phases. And sometimes I found sexuality to be triggering, and sometimes I don't. So sometimes I find that I'm able to just kind of experience it and not constantly compare it to Brian. I'm almost sort of I'm almost able to think of it as a different thing. Like, it's not the same category of thing.
Which is like, I feel like totally a defense mechanism to like get out there, and also kind of healthy, like in a way, to be able to separate the two, because I think that is pretty common to be like, how do you do this when you are comparing it to your partner that you chose and were with for so long? Like, how are you even open to that? So it's very interesting that you were able to do that pretty early on.
Yeah. I mean, after that initial experience, I didn't go on another date until 8 months after Brian died. So like, that one experience happened, and then I was like, okay, that was enough, and took 4 more months to kind of process more, and then kind of tried again, and then, have taken breaks. And it's really been fluid for me and shifted a lot. And I've definitely had experiences where I felt very, very triggered too. And just like, having sex will really make me miss Brian. And sometimes I don't even care, or I'm not interested at all. So it's been like the whole gamut, I feel, for me. How about you, Dina?
So mine was a little bit different, where I definitely felt the need for sex, and I had this like deep craving for physical, not even sex always, but like physical comfort from somebody, and wanting physical intimacy, and zero desire to go on a date and to sit, which, like, looking back, feels a little bit strange, but that was just how I handled it, was the idea of connecting with another person outside of just the physical was not of interest to me. So I waited, it was like 18 months before I had sex for the first time. And wasn't planning on it, wasn't like, this is it. Like, there was no like date. I got drunk and ended up making out with a person that I've known for a long time, that felt safe, and it just kind of happened that way. And it actually, for me, it felt like a really great moment, because there were no expectations beyond that. There was no like, we need to date or we need to go beyond that. It just felt like, this is a person that I trust and know enough, that knows my story. So there wasn't that like awkward of like, how do you explain where you're coming from and your fears? And it just was like, get drunk and do it kind of thing. And then the first date I went on was probably, it's in year 2, so maybe 6 months after that. And I signed up for Tinder. My friend came up to visit me, and I was taking care of my dad, who was dying and was living in my house, and was just like, I need to feel like a normal 30-something. And I was so stressed and like consumed by grief on all different levels, that the idea of a date at that point was a total distraction, total like, I can't handle my current life, and this is what I'm going to do. And again, just got really drunk, because it was the first like date I was on, and I didn't handle it well. And I don't regret it. I think it was felt like survival, in like a very weird way, of helped me get through a really, really tough time, at least temporarily. Like, it was this temporary Band-Aid that gave me something else to focus on. And I guess we can talk about it, whether that's healthy or not, but I don't think that's helpful at this point to overanalyze that. The first like relationship I had after Brad, like, again, I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was tired of going to weddings alone, and I was tired of going to events alone. And I just really wanted a person that it was like, I know I have fun with you. And it kind of started that way, of just like this natural, like, I don't want to do this stuff alone, and I'm not really ready for a relationship. And it ended up becoming a relationship, and probably one I wasn't really ready for. And but again, like, I think it was really good for me at the time, and for what I needed, and learned a lot, and had fun with this person, and Yeah.
So hard not to think of like what's healthy and what's not,
Right.
if you never put yourself out there ever, some people could say that's unhealthy. If you put yourself out there too soon, some people could say that's unhealthy. Like, I think even if you do something that feels like, for me, when I, kissed that guy and had that horrible reaction, like I said, I still don't think it was the wrong thing to do, because then I had that to process. Like, I
Yeah.
took in that experience and I processed it.
Hmm.
And then the next time I made out with somebody, I was able to enjoy it, which was a huge change from
Yeah.
a full on trauma response,
Right.
right?
And
So,
right. And how do you know? You have to learn. Like you said, you have to put yourself out there and things will go wrong. Like you're not going to meet somebody, kiss them for the first time, go on a date, be in a relationship, and then them be your partner. And if that is your experience, like, oh my gosh, how lucky are you? And I want to hear from you. Like, I don't know anyone that like that was their
yeah,
experience after their
a
partner died.
little more
Right,
complicated.
it's always more complicated. I think that's why it's like, but it's really hard to like share that and share these timelines even with you, because it's like there is like I haven't like sat down and really talked about like the sequence of things, and then it's like I'm already in my head of, well, should I have done that differently? Was that wrong? Like,
No.
and it's hard because we are talking about other people. I think like that's the like feels like the elephant in the room a little bit to me is
Yeah.
we're mostly talking about other people being involved in this, and so people that are alive, and how do you
Yeah.
respect them and their role on our journey and figuring this out. And I think that's part of my difficulty of like I'm happy to talk about anything as it relates just to me, but when we're talking about like our experiences with another person, it is this like fine line that we have to walk.
Exactly, exactly. I know, that's the thing, and it's really tricky, and I think that's probably another reason why it's not talked about a lot too. Have you struggled with this sort of push and pull between wanting a relationship and not wanting a relationship, or like pushing a relationship away?
Yes. And I think it has shifted. So just to remind people that I'm on, just got to year 4 since Brad died. And so I feel like, I'm doubled you, you're at year 2. And, so many of the conversations we have, I just remember being where you were at. And I struggled like a lot, and was not a person that really like, I feel like it was this hypothetical, like, oh, yeah, sure, this idea of a partner. Um, I was kind of like, it's out there and I know that's a possibility, but it felt so hard to grasp and understand that concept. Um, and then it felt like I had to, like, I owed it to Brad in some weird way and to his family and to the people that loved him to, like, stay sad forever, like, as a way to prove my love to Brad, which just, that shifted a lot. And that was my own perception, not really something that anyone else put on me. But um,
Yeah.
it took a while to be okay, and it still is hard to say like it's okay the idea of finding love and having another lifelong partner and wanting that. And I was always a person that didn't really was like I need to have this like traditional partnership, and so there's this like feminist side of me that struggles with that anyway. That's outside of grief and widowhood. um
Yeah.
but yeah, when you're 33, when your husband dies, like I loved being married, and that shifted from when I was younger and thought I wouldn't and didn't need that. And so the idea of like having somebody else and having that relationship and that kind of trust and connection with somebody, like, yes, that's an appealing thing to have. And it
Yeah.
took me a while to get there.
Yeah.
Have you struggled
Yeah.
with that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely am still in a place where that's kind of my main thing with all of this. Like, I haven't had a lot of guilt. I haven't had a lot of, I don't know. I kind of just, my big thing is I don't actually know if I can't really imagine myself
Hmm.
being happy with somebody else yet. And I think it just might need more time, but it's really hard for me to come to terms with accepting the fact that I would actually find someone who I would ever want that with
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, part of me is like, maybe I do want to just be alone forever and not get into another partnership with somebody else. And then part of me is very much torn and is like, but remember how awesome it was being in a partnership with Brian. Like, I'm like you, I didn't really ever know if I would have that. And like, I really loved that, having that with him. And there were so many things about it that I just enjoyed. And just having somebody who you can just like love so much every day feels so wonderful. And so, I mean, I think I have a lot of love to give to somebody. And not to say like that I need that. But there's a lot of
an important part of it. Like when you are this person that has so much to give and wanting to be able to share that with somebody, like,
yeah,
that's a real feeling.
Yeah. And I liked being in partnership, you know, I liked that feeling of having that person who's your person. Like, I think I really thrived in that kind of a space, but then coming out of it and starting to find your way on your own and then having this huge grief thing that you carry with you, I'm just like, we're good now, me and my grief. Like we're kind of a unit. We got our thing going now. And it's like, I don't really know how anyone else would fit into that yet. And like one of the wonderful men who I dated since Brian died, who is just like such a spectacular human being, and we connected so much on so many levels, so understanding of my grief, and I just couldn't do it. Like I just couldn't. I was like, I don't know if it's just timing or what, but I was just like, I'm not ready to do that with anybody else right now. And that really scared me too.
Yeah. And I totally relate to that. And I think I felt pretty similar to that, of just the grief is so intense. And I think you and I are very outward in how we share it and express it, and the idea of allowing someone else to support that. Like, you know, I feel like I am dating a different person now, and I feel very fortunate that this person like allows Brad to be in our conversations and to me be very open to that. But I also think that for me, it came with timing of getting to the point where I knew better how to carry that myself, and I'd been through it long enough to really like to be able to let somebody in and to be okay. And even then it's still hard, but like to cry about Brad and to share that with a person, it is the most intimate thing. Like we're going to talk about sex and all of these things, but sharing your grief and your partnership and your love with another potential partner is so intimate and so hard for anyone to understand, even people that are in this space. Like it was so hard for me to understand. And it's, I have to have that in a partner. Like I have to have someone that can help carry that and understand that. And that it takes a rare person. It takes a special person to get there. And I think early on, I was like, this will never exist. Like that will never exist. Like how could I possibly allow someone into this space?
Yeah, that sounds tricky.
Yeah. And then eventually you just, I think, I don't know. I think for me, it was like, I don't even know how to describe it because the grief is still there, but it's not like so all consuming. And so I'm not so much in my head analyzing how I carry it. You just start carrying it, you know, instead of thinking about how you carry it. It's just part of you and ingrained in you a little bit more, where it makes it easier to create this space for something else. At least that's how it felt for me, I think.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Okay, let's talk stigma and other people's expectations / our own expectations on ourselves. Because I think that a lot of people that reached out to us when we were preparing this episode talked a lot about this, like expectations from others or judgments from others around like timing, or people even asking us like, when's too soon? And we were joking before the episode started, we were like, we're not going to tell anybody like what timing, like look, even compared to like between us, our timing is so different of just like how it all unraveled. It's so complex. There's so many things interwoven of like dating, relationships, sex, kissing, even just physical intimacy, like all of it. And there's no timeline, because I think like we are all unique beings, and our relationships with our partners were all unique, and our sexuality is so completely unique. So
Yeah, I think it's so funny how many people ask this. And it's also not surprising because it is. It's like you want to know, you want someone so desperately to be like, this is when it will feel right. Like, because we're in this weird gray unknown space and we want it to be easier. And it's not. And it's like, it is so complicated. And I think, as you said, it's so different for everybody. So I'm sorry to everyone. We're not going to give you a time.
Yeah.
You got to figure that out and trust yourself of like, if it feels too soon, then it's too soon. And if it feels right and everyone else says it's too soon, then fuck them. like,
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
this is your
Yeah.
journey. And I think that comes like the perception of other people and the judgment. It's like, it's going to happen no matter what. Like whether it's your own perception of their judgment or people actually saying stuff to you, but this is your path. This is your journey.
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
I think it's so hard to let go of that, but it's really important too.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, nobody else understands your experience. You are the only one who understands your experience. You are the one who is in relationship with your partner who's dead. So nobody else's feelings matter, in my opinion, or
Right.
should matter. And I hate the fact that this is sort of an extra burden that widows have to carry of having other people's expectations or judgments on them, on top of how hard it is just navigating it on your own, all the judgments and expectations you have of yourself. I just hate that there's like any sort of worry about what other people are going to think. But having said that, I was going to share an experience that I had where around 8 months after Brian died, I wrote a piece and published it on my Medium blog about sexuality and widowhood and dating and my experience. And I talked about this date that I had where I freaked out. And then I talked about another experience I had that was better. And I remember publishing it, and like literally a minute later, one of my friends texted me and she was just like, "OMG, Mira, I can't believe you kissed someone already." And when I asked her, like, why? Like, why is that surprising? And she wasn't, openly mean about it or anything. She was just like, it surprised me. I didn't think you were ready for that yet. And I remember just the feeling in me where it was interesting. The way it made me feel was like, well, it's completely invisible, first of all. Like I was just like, you have no concept what this is like. And also like almost like separated from myself in a way. Cause I was like, oh yeah, this isn't what I would have expected of myself either before.
Yeah.
Brian was dying of cancer. If someone had told me you're going to be going out on a date with someone in 4 months and kissing them, I would have been like, no fucking way. Are you crazy? There's no way I would ever do that. And so just how disorienting widowhood can be and how much changes. And it just made me feel so disconnected from like my peers, myself, my expectations of my own life, and just, it was, yeah,
Yeah.
it was
And
horrible.
I think what I wish people understood, like now, just like imagining you in that scenario of like 8 months in, and like from our friends and the people that love us the most, it's like, I understand that this is difficult, but it's like every major milestone, whether that's kissing someone for the first time or having sex or going on a date or thinking about any of this, I just want your people to celebrate it because I don't think people understand how hard and how much internal turmoil comes with each of those milestones. And like you said, this wasn't our choice, but it's like just trying to move forward with life and survive in whatever way is necessary. And that might change 100 different times, but these things are really big and should be celebrated. Like the first kiss, even if it's a disaster, the first date, like should be celebrated because you put yourself out there, like in a really, really scary time.
Oh my God, totally.
And I say that though, and I'm now going to call myself out because
Okay.
I feel like I was a person who didn't understand. Like I had a friend who her boyfriend passed away, and collectively they were like my closest friends, and she started dating sooner than like I expected. And I don't think I ever outwardly said anything to her, but I remember because of my love for her boyfriend, like I was like totally internally judgmental of like how could you do, and now that I've been through it, I'm like, oh my God, like however you need to cope, whatever that looks like there's so many different things that none of us have any idea about of what someone's going through, what their relationship what the previous person was, what the relationship is now, that it's like, again, going back to just like we should be celebrating these moments and supporting our friends and our people because there's so much more than what's on the surface. And I understand how hard it is, especially if it's our late partner's friends who just, it's from a place of love. Like this judgment isn't necessarily directed at us. I think it's because they love this person so much. And it's like this weird way of like having to defend them, but it's like we have to carry that extra weight and burden of their feelings on it and our feelings on it and how we feel our partner, our late partners will feel about it and our current partners will feel about it. Like we have to carry all of that. And so that's why it's like people just don't really understand that, I don't think.
Yeah. Understand what it's like from the widow's perspective,
Right.
you know, when that happened to your friend, it's like, yeah, you weren't thinking of it from her perspective. And,
Right.
and also I think a lot of people I'm going to call myself out right now
Okay.
too. So I think a lot of the time there's this sort of, I hate this, but I hate when it happens to me, but it's like this expectation that, like you were saying at the beginning, like that we're going to be crying and be sitting in the grief and sitting in the darkness forever as like a tribute to this person who's gone, to a tribute to their love. And I know not everybody copes with grief that way. And I know that people who are like super extroverted and are out there and are socializing and dating right away are not grieving any less. Like I know those things in my brain. But recently I had this situation where there was this widow and I saw online that she was like out there partying and having all this fun. And I totally was just like, in my mind, like kind of unconsciously was like, oh, she must not be grieving that hard. Okay, maybe it wasn't such a loving relationship as me and Brian. And then I had seen something she'd written or something like that. And it was like, no, Mira, you idiot. Of course she is. That's how some people cope with overwhelming pain, is like distraction and socializing and dating and sex. And a lot of people reached out to us and were like asking or talking about using sex as a coping mechanism within grief, like as a way to not be in the pain and agony all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a completely valid distraction mechanism. I mean, lots of people drink, lots of people stay busy, lots of people just like binge on Netflix. You know, people do all sorts of things to smoke weed, whatever, like to manage the pain. And if you're having sex in a healthy way with like a consensual partner, I don't think that's any less healthy than like any other. It might even be healthier than like many other coping mechanisms, you know? Right. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. And also I wanted to say one other thing about the timeline thing, which is because I think just back to what we were saying when people were kind of asking us, like, what is the timeline?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's such a desire. I remember when Brian died, I had that question so much. I was like, how long? Because in my mind, when he first died, I was like, I'm going to eventually find someone else and then this pain is going to dissipate. Like I kind of told myself that at the beginning, even though I didn't want to be in another relationship. I was like, at some point, like in my brain, I was like, I will be in another relationship at some point and then it won't hurt. And I like told myself that. And then I remember kind of wondering, like, how long is it going to be? How long am I going to have to sit in this grief before I'll meet someone else? And that's been one of the things that's been hard as time has gone on, because that illusion has been completely shattered. And I've realized, you know, it's so much more complicated than that. It's not just going to like take away my pain. And also, I don't even know if I'm ever going to have that. Yeah. You know, so that's super important to kind of say too.
I do think that people jump into relationships for that reason, because you think if there's somebody else, if there's happiness in your life, if there's these like wonderful distractions, that somehow there's not the space for grief. And I think we've both learned that, oh, that grief comes with you, like in your next relationship and all your joyful moments and like all of this stuff, like it doesn't eliminate those feelings. They're just there together. So, you know, but I think I felt the same way of like, if only I can like fast forward to this time and this other experience, it will be better. And it's not the case.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into, we wanted to talk, or at least touch a little bit upon some of the pressures that we receive from people in our lives who want us to be in a relationship again. So there's like judgments, I think, of people who are like my friend, like, oh, I didn't think you were going to do that so soon or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then there's also pressure from people who mostly I feel like are people as opposed to our partners people, I can just tell like they want me to be in a relationship again because they, like anytime I've been dating anyone, like you can just tell they're like so excited and asking all these
Yeah.
questions. They really want, and that's part of that misconception we were just talking about, where like they think that then I'll be happy again if I'm in another relationship. They won't see me, they won't have to see me so sad. And like, sure, in a lot of ways, my life would probably be like practically easier if I had a partner who I was in love with, and sure, but I think that can sometimes feel like an extra burden on us. Like sometimes I feel like then there's this expectation on me, like that I should find somebody else, and people want me to, and I can feel that other people want me to find somebody else, and that can feel really tricky as well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think that it's like everyone wants you to be okay, and part of it is because they truly love and care about you, and part of it is because we don't know how to handle each other's grief. Like we've talked about a million times in our grief illiterate society, that when you're dating somebody else, it somehow is like, okay, I no longer have to worry about you. I can like cross you off my list because grief is no longer a part of your situation. And so I think it comes from a good place, but I think it also gets, at least that's how I take it, where it's like, oh, you actually just don't want to handle my sadness anymore. And I remember, posting when I was in my first relationship, and I posted on Instagram about it. And we had been dating for a while at that point, and the number of comments and likes, like it was like liked more than any other post I've ever like written, commented more times. And I remember feeling really shitty about it, of like all the like congratulations and like basically you did it. And I was just like,
Success.
like, I feel like I've accomplished so many amazing things as a widow and since Brent died, and was actually kind of offended. And I understand, I know you understand, like just people wanting the best for you, but it didn't really feel great. And I say that without like, I don't know how else I wanted people to respond. But like, it's just like, this is another thing I'm going through, and it's full of all kinds of emotions. And I don't know, it all just felt hard. Like sharing about these moments still feels hard. Like still feels hard.
I know. This whole thing of dating as a widow, it can feel like so isolating and so destabilizing. And like, even as I'm telling you, like these ways that I've dealt and things I've done, I'm like, who is this person? And
right.
who am I? It's so disorienting. And I remember like, I think like 2 weeks after Brian died, I was like attempting to watch this show on Netflix, and I was just sitting on my couch, and there was a scene of these people making out, and I remember just seeing them making out, and I was just like, oh my God, like, and I remember my thought process was, what if I never make out with anyone ever again? Mm-hmm. And then I was like, wait a moment. What if I do make out with someone again?
Right.
And I was like, I don't know which is more disturbing to me right now. And it's such an uncomfortable place to be in. And people just don't get that. It gets so destabilizing.
So I have a question related to that. So when you did make out for the first, like, did you feel like you were cheating on Brian? Like, did you have, because I know that's a common thing of like feeling like you were betraying your late partner. You did not feel that.
Right. And we did. We wanted to get into guilt and fears next, because that's another big one. Yeah. So this is a perfect way into guilt and fears. So I did not feel like that. I think that I may experience those things for the first time when and if I ever actually am like really falling in love with somebody. I can imagine perhaps, I don't know, I'm not sure, but because for me, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with my relationship with Brian. He was just so open. He wasn't very possessive of me or closed-minded about stuff in life. And so I think for some reason, I just know that with his personality, I know 100%. We didn't have any time to talk about this, by the way. That's another.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys talked about it at all, but yeah,
because like it was just so quick, and he was so out of it, and also I just kind of knew, like it wasn't like I had this deep desire to get his consent. Like I just knew because of who he is, I was just like, he's going to be like, fuck, do whatever the fuck you need to do to survive me. Like, don't, you know.
This is how I would feel with Brad, and I'm imagining how you would feel if it was reverse of like, yeah, you do anything. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. And I don't know, like, I believe that like once you enter the spiritual realm, like all of those feelings of jealousy or possessiveness that you might have just disappear and dissipate. And it's like love, and, you know, you want people to like be in their highest good and just connecting to themselves in whatever way they can. And like, I just know that Brian would just want me to do whatever I need to do to be happy. So I haven't felt any guilt. I felt other guilt within my grief a lot, but not specifically around being sexual with other men. It triggers me and makes me miss him more, I guess, is more what it is. Yeah. How about you? Have you ever felt like guilty or like you're cheating?
You know, I think it not like I'm cheating on Brad. And it's same thing. Like, I think we had a conversation like once, like a hypothetical conversation, which was like, yeah, you are like such a wonderful person. Like, I don't want you to be alone. Like, someone is deserving of your love, kind of like general overview. And I know how he would feel. So I'm not worried about that. I think what I struggled with, and yeah, so I think when it's like just the sex or the dating or the whatever stuff, felt like a big deal in a lot of ways, but not in terms of that kind of guilt. I did have like a moment that felt very weird that my friend kind of called me out, and she's kind of my like go-to to talk about all of this stuff with, of just like going back to like sharing with people and being open about it and being like, why is this hard for me? And she basically was like, because as it gets serious with somebody else, it's like the idea of this person being a quote unquote replacement for Brad or another lifelong partner, that's actually much harder to deal with in like a physical relationship or a date. So similar to what you're saying, that there is like another level of, and I assumed it would be easy. Like, you fall in love, you find that like a potential partner, it's like, okay, all those other things, like the bullshit stuff will go away. And it's like, oh no, it's all still there. Of now I'm actually more worried about betraying this other relationship I had with Brad, because this idea of someone competing, or, you know, they more than likely will get more time. Like, we could have like an entire lifetime versus 13 years, you know, and that's where I think it gets a little bit more complicated and difficult, at least for me. And it's like that's like my own internal fears come from that space of wanting to honor my relationship and never wanting it to feel like it's devalued in any way because somebody else is there.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Do you have worries about like not being able to find somebody who is going to compare with Brad? Because I think that's a common one that people were writing us about as well. Like,
I mean, I think for a very long time, yes. But the comparing thing, I kind of learned not to do early. Like, and I think that's really hard. And I think it's also very normal and common to be with somebody and be like, well, this is how it was with my other partner, with my late partner, with my spouse, and to immediately write somebody off.
Right. And I've never heard this specifically addressed within this context, but I know with other kind of mental health stuff, I've read this. There's this idea that if there's a thought that's kind of coming in, or something that like your brain wants you to process or think about, and you try to push it away or suppress it, it will just continue to come back in louder and louder and louder ways, versus like accepting it and thinking about it and kind of like allowing that thought in. Like, okay, I'm having this comparison and that makes sense, and kind of like working through it, as opposed to just being like, no, I can't do that. It's wrong. No comparisons, you know, because I think it's perfectly normal to make those comparisons. Like, this is not a divorce. This is somebody who you are deeply in love with, who died, you know? So, yeah, but I don't really have any answer.
No, it does make sense that qualities would be compared. But I think if it's like you're looking for like the exact replica, it's like, person's not, they don't exist.
That's not a good idea.
A lot of people ask about stuff that is basically like what's normal, and we have a lot of, and I do think it's really important to talk about it, because I think these are some of the more like taboo, like internal struggles, and so I do want to make sure we address, and we'll do more of these in the Q&As in the next one.
Like using sex as like a coping mechanism to deal with grief, totally normal. Like no rule book, no right or wrong, 100%. Yeah, and like feeling shame or like feeling shameful about having sex, or a lot of people commented to us like having difficulty getting off during sex because of grief, which I feel like that makes so much sense. Like obviously that is going to be an issue for some people. And also I also wanted to add, like, if that hasn't happened to you, that's also normal.
Yeah. There is such a range there of people who are, especially, and it's one of those things, I think it takes practice. Like I think the more you do it, like maybe the first couple times you will be in your head and you will have a hard time because it's a big deal. Like it's a big deal. And maybe not, maybe from the beginning you can, like you said, and like that's the release. That's like really wonderful.
I know. And just like, I feel like if there's one thing I hope people kind of take from this conversation is like, there is no right or wrong. How could there ever be a right thing? No matter what the path is that you take, it's not going to be the acceptable right path, because none of this makes sense and none of this is what you wanted for your life. And none of it is right. Another thing a lot of people, like quite a few people messaged us about masturbation and about like, thinking about their partners, their dead partners, and like whether that is healthy or like a good thing to be doing. Like, I don't know. I feel like some people might worry that that's sort of like living in the past and you sort of like preventing you from moving forward with your life. And I think that this sort of just that fear kind of plays into this so much more within grief too, of like, can we hold on to our relationship from the past? Does that mean we're stuck in our grief? All that kind of thing. And I think the more I go on this grief journey, the more I realize like it's all about duality. It's all about merging. I think it makes so much sense that people would be thinking about their partners. And also, I think that if you can't, that's also okay.
I would be too sad. Like I couldn't like have that physical kind of release about Brad in this like sexual way where I like want that release. So it wasn't and I loved that several people asked and wrote about this and shared their experience to both of us. And if you can have that moment of like positive release in that, like how wonderful is that? Like it's not wrong. It's not something to be ashamed of. Like that's so incredible. And on the flip side, which is, people had written me about this of masturbating and crying, like the immediate tears after, like breaking down crying. And that was my experience of needing that physical release. And, is it just pent up emotion and grief and sadness coming out in a different way? Is it because I'm doing it solo? And I don't really know, but that happened to me like every time in the beginning. Like immediate. And then I had that fear of like, when I have an orgasm with a man, am I going to have the same reaction? And then that like, oh my God, am I going to have sex for the first time and like just lose it? And
that's so,
And I just want people to know, because again, multiple people DM'd us about this of like, that's normal and common and happens. And I think, for the record, I didn't break down when I had an orgasm with a man for the first time. And so, there's hope if you have that fear. And also it's okay if you do. Like it's okay if you do. And also common from my
I think it really is. I think
and I probably did after, like, when I was by myself trying to process that and what that meant.
Yes, I've definitely done that too. And even one time, like pretty much right after, I didn't like break down. Like I don't think he knew, but there was one time when like right after we finished having sex, I was just lying there and I was just like wanted to cry so much and like missed Brian so much in that moment, and like did kind of start to cry like quietly to myself. And then
I've done that too.
I didn't feel like sharing that with him, but I've definitely, it just was like, oh my God, it just makes me miss him so much. Because that's the thing, sex can be triggering sometimes because it's an intimate thing that you shared with your partner and that you never necessarily thought that you would be doing with a different person. And just the mind flip of being like, oh no, now it's this thing that I'm like out there again, and that's the other thing is like this identity issue within being a sexual being. Cause like you're like out there dating again and, on Tinder or whatever, like, it's like, it's an identity fuck. Cause you're like, I didn't think that this was going to be my life. Like, who am I even? It's so confusing.
Yeah. It's so true.
But before we finish, I wanted to share this one story that I thought was like a nice way of ending the episode off. So there was a widow, just because I think it was such a unique perspective, and because a lot of people were asking us questions around like, how do you actually get into another relationship when you're forever in love with your husband? Like, even sometimes when I hear widows be like, but I'm remarried and like I have equal feelings for both my partners and I love them both equally and everything. I'm just like, it just feels so simplistic. Like, and I almost like don't believe it. I'm like, but is it true? And I'm so interested to see if I actually ever go through something like that. And I'm like, it is true. Like, people say like when you have another kid, you don't think that you can love your kid anymore, but then all of a sudden you have room for this other love for the second kid and you love them equally. So people kind of use that comparison. So I thought that this woman's perspective was so interesting. So basically, it was a perspective I haven't heard before. She was in a relationship with somebody now, and she basically acknowledged, like, she said, I have had to sit with the discomfort within this new relationship that I am forever in love with my partner who's dead, that I wanted to be with him. Like, he was my deepest love I have ever experienced. But having said that, over time and through, processing my grief and therapy and lots of things, I have come to accept within myself that I want another relationship. I want to be in a partnership with somebody and I want to love somebody. And I do love my new partner, but it's not the same. And like, she's basically acknowledged to herself that it's not that simple, and that she she has still she's like, I still love this person and I choose this.
I love that perspective. And this idea of being simple, I have accepted the fact that it is not simple. Like, having your partner die in your 30s unexpectedly and watching the person you thought you'd spend the rest of your life with die means it will never be simple, because that experience, that trauma, will be with me forever. And that means the next person that I'm with that is now part of his life and his relationship. And I'm okay with it. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable hearing the like, I've used this example before, like years ago, I was like, I hope I get, like, again, seeing people that are married and happy the second time and being like, I'm equally happy. And I'm like, I really just hope to get to that point where I'm like, I don't know what I would do because this one's so great and you were so great. And so, I think that's the thing, is we want to, like, I want to have that.
I know.
Like mind fuck of like, this person is just so wonderful and lovely. And I think that's possible, but it doesn't mean it's ever going to be simple. And I think that's the difference for me, at least, is it will be more complicated than other relationships. And there will be things that other people won't have to deal with. And that comes with dating me and being in a relationship and being in love with me and having a future with me. And, I don't know beyond that, but I love when people can share, especially to us, that then we can share that perspective of, she's married and this space that, like, we haven't been in, and to choose this partner because the other one's not an option. And like, that's feels so real.
I know. That was my response. I was like, I had the exact same response as you. It was sort of like, in a way, it was like a dismantling of this hope that I have, which is that I do reach this point one day where I have this partner who's like, who I couldn't choose. Like, it's just, they're equally amazing. And like, so it kind of felt a little bit uncomfortable for me, because I was like, but it felt so real. And whether or not you or I are ever ever have that experience, we might have a completely different experience. I just thought it was worth mentioning because there are likely other people who are in that that kind of situation.
I totally agree. Where it's like, I still believe that is the case, that I will like be confused, and I hope to, and I will hold on to that hope. But I think sharing these perspectives and making these choices are always worthwhile.
Yeah, and that it's valid, that it's still valid to choose somebody, to be in a relationship, even if you don't have this picture perfect ending of like, they're totally equal and I couldn't choose. Like, even if you're not in that situation, and that isn't the first person who's told me that, by the way.
Yeah, and the reality is, because she will never have to choose. Like, that is, we're not living in this alternate universe where that will ever be. She's choosing her partner that she's with, because that's who is there and who she's in love with and deciding to have a future with. And there's something that like feels simple and beautiful, like just that fact of itself.
Yeah, and like what you said too, like you can't tease apart who you are now from your grief, from your trauma. You know, there is a bonding, I feel, that happened between me and Brian when he was sick, when he was dying, that was like beyond anything. Like that is you build such an intimacy, like as a caregiver for the person you love. And like, I'm just like, how could anybody, like, it's just the experiences are so different, you know? So
especially when it's like a new relationship where it's fun and light and all of these things. And it's like, you're right. You like have experienced the most intimate thing with a human being, which is caring for them as they die, as they leave this world. No one can compare to that.
Yeah.
Until you have that experience with them. Like you can't. And that's also okay. It doesn't mean there's not potential for love and all of these other great, beautiful things.
Totally. And I think it can change over time. Like, I really do believe that over time, things do continue to evolve and change. Like, I think even if you feel this way about somebody at the beginning of a relationship, there's so many different ways to build intimacy. And with some people, it's that immediate spark. And with some people, it's over time. And there's just all different types of relationships, you know? So,
yeah, I think that's such a good point. Like, just to be open, because how it was with you and Brian, how it was with Brad and I, it's like that might not be like the thing that connects and builds intimacy with the next person.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, I think we're out of time.
Yeah. So next time we're going to answer all of your questions. So if you guys were watching this and things came up, you have questions, we'll do another little question box, I'm sure, but throw comments, send us a DM, and we'll add it for the next conversation.
Yeah. Can't wait. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that would be funny.
We'd be terrible.
I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet, to be honest, considering all the things that have gone wrong.
And now we probably jinxed it. I was going to do, like, legit do bourbon. I was like, it seems aggressive at 4 o'clock. For the rest of my life and what I need to actually accomplish today.